Okay, let's dive in. Think about one of the biggest icons ever, Elvis Presley. We all know the official story, right? August 16th, 1977. But what if that wasn't the whole story?
It's a huge question and one that honestly just won't go away. And today we're really going to unpack it. We've got this fascinating mix of sources, personal claims, some pretty surprising scientific stuff, FBI files, even these really deep personal reflections.
All about the king, Elvis. So our mission today is kind of twofold. We want to look at these often sensational claims about him still being alive, but also explore this other side presented in the sources, his spiritual journey.
Exactly. We're trying to see what this collection of information really tells us.
About Elvis, yeah, but also about, how we believe things, what we look for in life. It goes pretty deep.
Right.
So let's start with that big mystery.
Right. The core claim that just hangs there. Just a chance he could still be alive. And the sources really emphasize his fame, like probably more famous than anybody was ever, just setting the scale. And it's interesting, this idea wasn't just cooked up after he died. The sources mention something pretty specific. Nobody knows about 2 weeks before he passed away of him telling them that he had to go away, he wouldn't be seen.
Like planting a seed almost.
Kind of lays the groundwork, doesn't it, for this whole enduring mystery.
Okay, so then things get, well, scientific, or at least science gets involved. There's this Dr. Ronald Hinton, a psychiatrist, right? And his patient.
Yeah, the man who calls himself Jesse, named after Elvis's twin who died at birth.
And the really big claim here is about DNA. That this Jesse's DNA matches both sides of the Elvis family tree.
It's a bombshell claim, for sure. And apparently the forensic scientist, Tony Tambasco, who looked at some of this early on, his reaction was quoted as, "It does look like wow."
Wow, indeed. The implication being, well, you can't fake the DNA, right? If that holds up, it changes everything.
It absolutely would challenge the official narrative. But there's more on the DNA front. A pathologist, Dr. Harold Stilton, he'd done liver biopsies on Elvis before.
Right, I remember reading this. He released those biopsies for more testing.
Yes, and the reported finding was a different DNA type from the 1975 biopsy sample and the autopsy specimen, a difference between the living Elvis sample and the post-mortem one.
So what did Dr. Spin conclude from that?
Well, his conclusion was pretty startling, as the sources put it. He apparently said, "I can't argue with science. Elvis was not in the coffin."
Whoa, that's direct. From a medical professional.
Very direct. It suggests a major inconsistency, doesn't it? Needs explaining.
So with these things bubbling up the DNA questions, Dr. Stan's statement, you'd think someone would have officially reopened the case.
Well, attempts were apparently made in Memphis, but the sources say both the local police and Tennessee Attorney General's office refused, flat out.
And Lisa Marie?
We're told she also respectfully refused our request for DNA.
So the official channels remain closed.
Pretty much. And the family's lawyer, William Bradley, his stance reflects that. He apparently called the whole idea of Elvis being alive just nonsense.
It's that classic pattern, isn't it? Official story versus these persistent, unsettling claims.
Exactly. The established narrative is powerful. But let's move beyond the biological stuff for a second. The FBI files.
Ah, yes. Over 1,400 pages of FBI documents on Elvis. That's a lot. And some parts are still classified.
Yeah, that number alone makes you pause. What's in there? The sources suggest these documents prove that Elvis Presley may have had a life-or-death reason for disappearing, and, get this, strongly suggests he was still alive at least 4 years after he was found dead.
4 years after. That moves it from just maybe he faked his death to something else entirely.
It really does. It feeds into those theories about, like, witness protection or some kind of orchestrated disappearance, and it kind of echoes what some people who saw the body apparently said. "I just didn't believe it was him."
Then you have the little details, the ones believers latch onto, like the gravestone.
The misspelling of the middle name. Aaron instead of Aaron.
Yeah. Presented as a kind of code, right? A sign that he ain't in it. Plus that other bit about the coffin being placed one space over from where he really planned to be interred.
These are the kinds of symbolic details that really fuel the belief for some. It suggests intention, hidden messages.
And it's not just anonymous internet folks. You mentioned Jeannie C. Riley, the singer.
Right. Apparently, she went from skeptic to full believer, stating she knows for a fact Elvis is alive, even claiming that several of the top names in the music world talk to him all the time.
That's a huge claim. She acknowledged people would think she was crazy.
Yeah, she said something like, "There are people in Nashville right now laughing at me, well, I've got nothing to lose."
That level of conviction, it often leads to things like the witness protection theory.
Which the sources mention as a strong possibility.
It offers a kind of framework, I guess, a reason why he might disappear so completely. But then, back to forensics, we hit another snag, handwriting analysis. Right, there was a letter from Jesse, the guy claiming to be Elvis. He wrote something like, "If I continue to expose myself, I will be eliminated."
And an international graphologist, Shirley Mason, looked at it. Her conclusion?
She was certain. Jesse is Elvis. She said, "The same person wrote everything I have seen. No one else can write in the same pattern."
A very definite statement from an expert, but
But then another expert, Mary Kelly, a forensic document examiner, compared Jesse's writing to an actual Elvis letter, one he wrote to Nixon in '72.
and her findings.
Inconclusive. Basically, she said, "I couldn't say that they were the same writer, and I certainly couldn't say that they weren't the same writer."
Which just highlights how tricky this stuff is. You know, handwriting analysis isn't always clear-cut. It leaves you hanging.
So after all that DNA questions, FBI files, handwriting debates, where does Graceland stand?
Unmoved. Their official line, as reported, is crystal clear. We firmly believe that person who died on August 16th was Elvis. End of story for them.
Okay, so that whole side of it, the is he alive mystery, it's full of these compelling fragments, but also contradictions and dead ends.
Absolutely. But now let's pivot. Because the sources we looked at don't just focus on that. They also paint this really rich picture of Elvis's inner life, his spiritual side. It's almost a parallel narrative.
Yeah, this part was fascinating. He's described not just as the king of rock and roll, but as a searcher about life, a searcher about truth. Someone always reading, looking, questioning.
And dealing with this internal conflict, this fight between, what was right, what was wrong, it suggests a lot more depth than the usual public image.
There's even talk about his future plans, musically, maybe going into gospel.
Yeah, and more than that, a sense that he possibly had a religious calling, that maybe his fame could be used for something bigger, to make mankind a little better.
And he actively sought ways to manage the pressure.
Right.
Meditation.
Yes, using it to get inside himself, finding that it puts your mind at ease. The sources emphasize he truly had that desire to find peace and tranquility, just seeking some quiet in the storm of his life.
And he found it in unexpected ways, like sneaking off to chapels.
Exactly. He apparently longed to just leave the world, walk around the park, enjoy the serenity, and people left him alone. The sources talk about him visiting chapels, talking with monks for hours, and nobody ever knew. No press, not about money, just a genuine private search.
Wow. That paints a very different picture.
It really does. And then there's this account of a really intense spiritual experience he apparently had. He wanted to feel God.
And what happened?
During a prayer, apparently his body began to tremble as weeping. He felt something like a blast, and his reaction afterwards, just tears, saying, it happened, it finally happened, God has blessed me.
That sounds incredibly profound, like a breakthrough moment.
That's how it's framed. The moment he felt he reached his goals and what he thought, his purpose was in life, a real transformation. The sources use this beautiful analogy.
The butterfly one.
Yeah, it's like we're a butterfly, a caterpillar that turned into butterfly. The old man was dying, yes, so that the new man may live. Suggesting the spiritual rebirth was as significant, maybe more so, than any idea of faking his death.
Okay, so that brings us to this broader message in the sources. It moves beyond just Elvis's experience to something more universal.
Right. It uses his story, his fame, as a kind of launching point to talk about deeper spiritual truths. There's this contrast drawn. Kings rise and fall, but Christ remains.
Putting even Elvis's legendary status in perspective.
Exactly. Saying that for all these famous figures, all of their glory and all of their fame, it's all past. It's not just saying fame is fleeting, but that chasing only that, the worldly stuff, cars, money, fabulous home, can actually backfire. The sources say it can turn around and bites them, devours them, or even destroys lives. It brings up that old saying, it's lonely at the top, and suggests it was painfully true for Elvis.
So if worldly success can be empty or even destructive, what's the alternative presented?
The sources point towards a spiritual anchor, saying that Jesus remains when even family and friends come and gone. The call is to anchor our souls on him.
It sounds like giving something up, but the sources frame it differently.
Yeah, they talk about saying yes to God and no to this world actually means gaining everything. That the true riches, the true sweetness of life come from that connection, regardless of whether you have money or friends or fame.
That really shifts the definition of rich, doesn't it?
Completely, it emphasizes that it doesn't matter about the world. What matters is God. And that God isn't looking for superstars, some great one, but rather somebody with a great heart.
So it's about the intention behind your actions.
Precisely. Things done as unto the Lord out of your love for God. That's what counts, even if nobody else sees you. It's a very internal measure of worth.
And there's that interesting phrase about a secret society of faith.
Yeah, described as being out in the open, but people can't see it. Like a truth that's available to everyone, but easily missed if you're not looking for it.
It leads to a pretty stark choice presented in the sources.
A very powerful statement. I'd rather the whole world be against me and God before me than to be with the world and have God against me. Really crystallizes that perspective.
And the section wraps up with a really personal testimony, right?
Yeah, someone reflecting on their own journey saying, I'm not where I was. I am where I am now. I live in the Father's house. I've come home. It really lands that feeling of transformation and finding peace.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the enduring, almost mythical questions about whether Elvis physically survived.
Right, digging into the DNA claims, the FBI stuff, the conflicting evidence, all of that.
To this equally profound but very different narrative about his deep spiritual searching and transformation.
A journey away from the emptiness of fame towards, well, what the sources present as true fulfillment and peace.
So whether you think Elvis sought a new life by disappearing or found a new life through this inner spiritual change,
Or maybe elements of both are intertwined in the legend.
the sources definitely make you think about what it really means to find peace, find purpose, find that sense of coming home, especially when the world wants you to be just one thing, an image.
It's a fascinating lens on fame, belief, and the search for meaning.
So the final thought for you listening is this. What might it mean in your own life to find that secret society of truth, the one that's supposedly hidden in plain sight?